The restaurant sat high above the city, wrapped in glass and soft golden lights. From the outside, it looked calm and welcoming, but inside, the air was tight with tension. People spoke in low voices, careful not to draw attention. Expensive suits and polished shoes filled the room. This was not a place where mistakes were forgiven easily. At the center of it all sat a powerful Arab billionaire. He was known for his sharp mind, fast decisions, and short temper when things went wrong. He had flown in for a single evening to discuss a major investment that could change the future of the hotel and many businesses connected to it. Time mattered to him. Respect mattered even more. From the moment he arrived, small things felt off. His table was not ready when he walked in. The menu placed in front of him was different from what he had requested earlier. He spoke quietly at first, asking questions in English, though it was clear it was not the language he was most comfortable with. The staff nodded, smiled, and replied, but their answers missed his meaning. As minutes passed, his calm began to slip. A dish arrived that he had clearly declined. When he pointed it out, the server apologized but did not fully understand why he was upset. Another staff member stepped in, trying to help, but the explanation only made things worse. Words were exchanged, polite on the surface, but heavy with frustration underneath. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. He felt ignored, misunderstood, and embarrassed in front of his guests. In his world, such mistakes were signs of carelessness and disrespect. His partners at the table grew silent, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. Across the room, a young waitress noticed everything. She was carrying a tray of glasses, moving between tables quietly, as she did every night. Her uniform was simple, her hair neatly tied back, her face calm. To most people, she blended into the background, just another worker doing her shift. But she could feel the tension like a weight in her chest. She recognized the look on the billionaire's face. Not just anger, but disappointment. She slowed her steps, listening carefully to the words being exchanged. The problem was not just the food or the delay. It was something deeper. The manager approached the table, speaking quickly, trying to smooth things over. Promises were made. Discounts were offered. Apologies repeated. Yet the billionaire's expression did not change. He glanced at his watch, then pushed his chair back slightly. "I think this meeting is over," he said in firm English. His voice was controlled, but the message was clear. The room seemed to hold its breath. Conversations nearby stopped. The manager froze for a moment, then forced a nervous smile. He tried again to explain, but the billionaire shook his head. "This place does not respect its guests," he said. "I will not stay where I am not understood." He stood up. That single movement sent a quiet shock through the restaurant. Everyone knew what it meant. If he walked out, the deal was gone. The hotel's reputation would suffer. Future opportunities would disappear just as quickly. The waitress felt her hands tremble slightly as she held the tray. She told herself it was not her place. She was just a waitress. Speaking up could cost her job. Staying silent would be easier. But something inside her refused to let her turn away. She had grown up hearing stories of misunderstanding, of pride wounded by careless words. She knew how much respect and proper communication mattered in his culture. She also knew that no one else in the room truly understood what he was feeling. The billionaire took one step away from the table. The manager followed him, still talking, his voice rising with panic. The words sounded empty now. The waitress took a breath. She set the tray down slowly on a nearby counter. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure others could hear it. She wiped her hands on her apron, then turned toward the man who was about to leave. For a moment she hesitated. Memories flashed through her mind. Late nights studying, family sacrifices, times she had been underestimated because of her position. All of it led to this single choice. She took a step forward. The sound of her shoes on the floor was soft, but it caught attention. The manager glanced back, confused. The billionaire paused, sensing movement behind him. The waitress stopped a few feet away, keeping a respectful distance. She straightened her posture, her voice steady despite the fear inside. She did not speak yet. The billionaire turned halfway, clearly annoyed, expecting another apology he did not want to hear. His eyes met hers briefly. He saw a young woman in a plain uniform, nothing special at first glance. "What is it now?" he asked sharply. The manager opened his mouth to interrupt, but the waitress gently raised her hand, not in command, but in request. Her eyes were calm, not challenging. "Please," she said in English softly. "May I say something?" The billionaire hesitated. Something about her tone made him stop. It was not fear. It was not arrogance. It was respect. He nodded once, impatient but curious. The waitress took another breath. The room seemed to shrink around them. Every ear was listening now, though no one dared to stare openly. She switched languages. The words that came out of her mouth were clear, fluent, and perfectly spoken Arabic. She addressed him with the proper greeting, the kind that showed deep cultural understanding. She spoke with humility, acknowledging his frustration without defending the restaurant. Her voice was calm, her words carefully chosen. The effect was immediate. The billionaire froze. His hand, which had been adjusting his jacket, stopped mid-motion. His eyes widened slightly, not in anger, but in shock. He turned fully toward her now, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. The restaurant remained silent. Even the soft background music seemed distant. For the first time that evening, the billionaire did not look furious. He looked stunned. He replied to her in Arabic, slowly, as if testing whether what he had just heard was real. She answered him without hesitation, matching his words, his tone, even the polite pauses. A short exchange followed. She explained the misunderstanding clearly, translating the staff's intentions and the errors that had occurred. She apologized on behalf of the restaurant, not as an employee reciting lines, but as a human being who truly understood his disappointment. The manager stood speechless, unable to follow the conversation. The guests at nearby tables exchanged glances, sensing that something important was unfolding. The billionaire's shoulders relaxed slightly. His voice softened. He asked her where she learned the language. She smiled faintly but did not explain yet. Instead, she said one final sentence, still in Arabic, expressing sincere respect and asking him to reconsider, not for the business deal, but for the principle of fairness. There was a long pause. Then the billionaire exhaled slowly. He looked around the restaurant, then back at the waitress. The anger that had filled the room only moments earlier had faded into something quieter, heavier, more thoughtful. He nodded once. "Sit," he said to his guests, returning to his chair. The manager let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The restaurant seemed to come back to life, though the energy had changed completely. The waitress stepped back, her legs weak, her heart racing. She returned to her station, unsure of what would happen next. She had no idea that this single moment would soon change her life, and the billionaire's, in ways none of them could imagine. The restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but nothing felt the same anymore. Conversations resumed, glasses clinked, and servers moved again. Yet a quiet awareness hung in the air. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something unusual. The billionaire sat back in his chair, no longer tense, but thoughtful. He listened as his guests spoke, though his attention drifted back to the young waitress from time to time. She moved carefully now, focused on her tasks, avoiding attention. Her hands still felt shaky, but she kept her face calm. The manager leaned closer to the billionaire, speaking in a softer tone than before. He offered more explanations, more apologies, and promises of better service. This time, the billionaire listened without cutting him off. He nodded once or twice, but his eyes followed the waitress whenever she passed nearby. After a few minutes, he raised his hand slightly. "Please," he said in English, "ask her to come here." The manager looked confused at first, then relieved. He turned quickly, scanning the room until he spotted her. When he approached, his voice was low and urgent. "He wants to speak with you," he said. "Be careful." The waitress swallowed and nodded. She wiped her palms on her apron again, then walked toward the table. Each step felt heavier than the last. She reminded herself to stay respectful, to stay calm. She stopped beside the table, standing straight but not stiff. The billionaire looked up at her. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to an empty chair nearby. She hesitated. "I'm working," she replied gently. He gave a small smile. "Just for a moment." She sat, keeping her hands folded in her lap, her posture modest. Around them, the manager and guests watched quietly, pretending not to stare. He spoke to her again in Arabic, his tone different now. It was curious, almost warm. He asked her where she learned to speak so fluently, and how long she had studied. She answered honestly. She told him she had grown up in a home where the language was spoken with care and respect. She spoke of long evenings listening, learning not just words, but meaning. She explained that language was not just sound, but emotion. He listened closely, nodding slowly. "You did not sound rehearsed," he said. "You spoke like someone who understands." She lowered her eyes slightly. "I tried to understand how you felt," she replied. "Not just what you were saying." That answer seemed to touch something deeper. He leaned back, folding his hands together. "Most people speak to correct me," he said. "Very few speak to understand me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the restaurant filled the space between them. Then he asked her why she chose to step forward. He pointed out that it was risky, that she could have lost her job. She paused before answering. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "silence causes more damage than mistakes." The billionaire let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. Across the room, some of the staff whispered to each other. They were surprised. No one had ever seen him speak so calmly after being angry. The manager watched with a mix of relief and worry, unsure where this conversation might lead. The billionaire thanked her and allowed her to return to work. She stood, bowed her head slightly, and walked away, her legs trembling again. As she returned to her duties, she noticed people looking at her differently now. Not with judgment but curiosity. A few guests smiled at her. One even whispered, "That was brave." She did not reply. She focused on refilling glasses and clearing plates. Yet inside, her thoughts raced. Had she said too much? Had she crossed a line? At the table, the meeting continued. Food was served again, this time carefully checked. The atmosphere grew lighter. Laughter returned, though quieter than before. The deal was not discussed openly, but the tension that threatened to destroy it had eased. The billionaire spoke to his guests in a low voice. He admitted that he had been quick to judge. He said the misunderstanding reminded him of how easily power could blind people, including himself. Later, he asked the manager to sit with him briefly. The manager did so nervously. "You have capable people here," the billionaire said, "but they are not being used well." The manager nodded quickly, agreeing with anything he said. "I want that waitress's shift schedule," the billionaire continued. "And her background." The manager blinked. "Her background, sir?" "Yes," he said calmly. "Education, languages, everything." The manager promised to provide it immediately. Meanwhile, the waitress finished her section and stepped into the staff area for a short break. She leaned against the wall, finally allowing herself to breathe deeply. Her heart was still racing. She replayed the moment in her head again and again, wondering how her life might change, or whether nothing would change at all. She remembered how often she had been told to stay quiet, to not draw attention, to accept her place. Tonight, she had done the opposite. When she returned to the floor, the billionaire was preparing to leave, but this time his movements were unhurried. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and spoke to the manager and his guests. There was no anger in his face now. As he walked past the waitress, he stopped. He looked at her and spoke softly, in Arabic. "You reminded me of something important," he said. "Thank you." She nodded, unable to find the right words. He walked out of the restaurant, not furious, but thoughtful. The doors closed behind him, and the room let out a quiet, collective breath. The waitress did not know it yet, but this night was far from over. The choice she made had started something that could not be undone. And somewhere in the billionaire's mind, a plan was already beginning to form. The night did not end when the restaurant doors closed behind the billionaire. For him, the drive back to his hotel was quiet, almost heavy. City lights passed by the window, but his mind stayed in that restaurant. He kept hearing the waitress's calm voice, the way she chose her words, the respect in her tone. It bothered him in a way anger never had. He was used to people speaking around him, not to him, used to fear, flattery, or rushed apologies. What he heard that night was different. It was honest. It reminded him of home, of conversations where meaning mattered more than power. At the hotel, he dismissed his security early and went straight to his room. Instead of making calls or checking messages, he sat by the window, staring at the city below. He replayed the misunderstanding again and again, seeing now how quickly he had assumed disrespect. For the first time in a long while, he questioned himself. The next morning, the restaurant felt different too. The staff gathered early, whispering about the night before. The manager looked unusually serious. He asked about the waitress, asking others what they knew about her. Some shrugged. Some said she was quiet, hardworking, never late. The waitress arrived for her shift unaware of the attention. She sensed the change the moment she stepped inside. Conversations paused when she walked by. A few co-workers smiled at her with curiosity, others with envy, but no one spoke openly. She focused on her work, though her thoughts kept drifting back to the billionaire's words. Thank you. Simple words, but heavy with meaning. She wondered if that was the end of it. It wasn't. Later that afternoon, the manager called her into his office. His voice was polite but tense. He asked about you, the manager said. Everything. Your background, your education. Her heart skipped. Did I do something wrong? She asked. No, he replied quickly. Not wrong. Just unexpected. He told her that the billionaire had requested a private meeting that evening, and he wanted her present. The room felt suddenly too small. Why me? She asked. The manager shook his head. I don't know, but be careful. People like him don't do anything without reason. She left the office with mixed feelings. Fear sat beside curiosity. She had lived her life carefully, avoiding attention. Now attention had found her anyway. That evening, a private room was prepared in the hotel. The billionaire arrived quietly, without the dramatic entrance of the night before. He greeted the manager politely, then asked for the waitress. When she entered, he stood briefly, a gesture of respect. She returned it with a small nod. They sat across from each other at a simple table. No food, no distractions. He began by apologizing. The word surprised her. I reacted from pride, he said in Arabic. Not understanding. That is my mistake. She listened, saying nothing, allowing him to finish. He asked her to tell her story. Not just how she learned the language, but who she was, where she came from, why she worked there. She spoke slowly, carefully. She talked about growing up in a modest home, where respect and education were valued even when money was scarce. She spoke of learning languages as a way to connect, not impress. She shared how life had pushed her into work early, but never took away her curiosity. He listened without interrupting. You are working far below your ability, he said finally. She did not argue. She had heard that before. But ability alone is not enough, he continued. Courage matters too. And you showed that. She admitted she was afraid that night, that her hands had been shaking. He smiled faintly. Courage is not the absence of fear, he said. It is speaking anyway. Outside the room, the manager waited nervously. Inside, time moved slowly. The conversation was not about business. It was about values, about misunderstanding, about how easily people were judged by their position. The billionaire asked if she had plans beyond the restaurant. She hesitated, then admitted she had dreams she had set aside, education she could not afford, opportunities she thought were not meant for people like her. He leaned back, thoughtful. People like you, he said, are the reason places succeed, even when they don't realize it. When the meeting ended, he did not make promises. He did not offer money or jobs. He simply thanked her again and said he hoped they would speak in the future. As she left the room, her emotions felt tangled. Relief, confusion, hope she was afraid to feel. That night, the billionaire made calls. Quiet ones. Not to threaten or demand, but to ask questions. About the hotel. About the city. About people who worked in silence. He began to see things differently. The next days passed slowly for the waitress. She returned to her routine, but something inside her had shifted. She paid more attention to how people spoke, how often misunderstandings were allowed to grow. The staff treated her with more respect now. The manager watched her closely, unsure whether she was still just a waitress or something more. One afternoon, a sealed envelope arrived at the restaurant addressed to her. The manager handed it to her with raised eyebrows. Inside was a short note, written in Arabic. Thanked her again. It spoke of opportunity as responsibility. And it asked her to meet again, not as staff, but as herself. She folded the note carefully, her hands steady this time. Whatever was coming next, she knew one thing for sure. Her life was no longer standing still. The second meeting did not feel like the first. There was no tension, no raised voices, no audience watching from a distance. It took place in a quiet lounge with soft light and wide windows. The city outside moved at its own pace, unaware of the quiet change happening inside. The waitress arrived early, dressed simply, not in uniform this time. She sat with her hands folded, waiting. When the billionaire entered, he greeted her with the same respectful tone as before. It still felt unreal to her. They spoke slowly, carefully, as two people trying to understand each other beyond roles and titles. He asked her about her daily life, not in a curious way but a listening one. She told him about long shifts, tired feet, and the small moments that kept her going. The smile from a guest. A thank you that felt real. He shared stories too. Not about success but about loneliness at the top. About rooms full of people who agreed with him, yet never truly spoke to him. He admitted that anger had become a shield, a way to stay in control. She listened without judging. At one point, he asked her a question that surprised her. Do you believe people can change? She thought for a moment. Only when they choose to listen, she said. He nodded slowly, as if accepting something he had long avoided. Days passed after that meeting. Then weeks. The restaurant returned to its routine, but behind the scenes, quiet changes were happening. Training sessions were added. Language support was introduced. Staff were encouraged to speak up instead of staying silent. No announcement was made, but people noticed. The waitress was asked to help. Not as a manager, not as a supervisor, but as a bridge. She helped translate, explain, and calm situations before they grew tense. She did it carefully, never showing pride, never forgetting where she started. Some coworkers welcomed the change. Others felt uneasy. Whispers followed her in hallways. Was she favored? Was she planning to leave? She ignored the noise. One evening, the billionaire returned to the restaurant, quietly. He sat at a corner table, observing. He watched how staff interacted, how guests were treated, how the waitress moved through the room. He noticed how people now spoke with more patience. Later, he asked her to join him again. I've been thinking, he said, about responsibility. She waited. When someone has power, he continued, they often use it to protect themselves, rarely to protect others. He told her he wanted to invest in more than buildings and profit. He wanted to invest in people, training, education, understanding. She felt both hope and fear rise together. He offered her a choice, not an order. He asked if she would help design a small program for the hotel staff, a way to teach communication, cultural awareness, and respect. He made it clear she could say no. She did not answer right away. She thought of her coworkers, of how easily help could turn into pressure. I'll help, she said finally, but only if it stays human. He smiled. That's exactly why I asked you. Work began quietly. She helped create simple sessions. Nothing fancy, just stories, examples, shared experiences. Mistakes were discussed openly. People laughed. Sometimes they cried. For the first time, many staff members felt seen. The manager watched with mixed emotions. Pride, relief, and fear of losing control. But results spoke louder. Complaints dropped. Guests stayed longer. Tension softened. The waitress still worked shifts. She still cleared tables and carried trays. But now, when problems arose, people looked to her not for authority, but for clarity. One night, after a long session, she sat alone near the window, exhausted. The billionaire joined her quietly. "You've changed this place," he said. "We changed it," she replied. He nodded. Then he said something she didn't expect. "One day I will leave," he said. "But this will remain." She understood what he meant. Influence mattered more than presence. Not everyone approved. A few senior staff resisted. Some thought she had stepped out of line. One complained directly to management. She was called in again. This time, she spoke with confidence she didn't know she had. She explained her intentions. She took responsibility. She also accepted criticism. The decision came quietly. She was asked to stay. The billionaire supported it without interference. Word of the changes spread slowly. Other hotels asked questions. Other managers visited. No one spoke of the night of anger anymore. They spoke of progress. One afternoon, she received another note. Short, simple. It said the final decision would be made soon. She knew what it meant. The investment. The future. That evening, she walked home slowly, thinking about how much had changed from one choice made in fear. She did not feel powerful. She felt responsible. And somewhere across the city, the billionaire prepared to make a decision that would affect more than business. The story was moving toward its final turn. The final meeting was scheduled quietly, without announcements or excitement. No reporters waited outside. No large audience gathered inside. It was just another evening in the hotel, yet for those involved, it carried more weight than any grand event. The waitress arrived early again. She no longer felt the same nervousness she once did, but there was still a steady beat in her chest. Not fear. Responsibility. She had learned the difference. The billionaire arrived shortly after. He looked calm, thoughtful, not rushed. Time no longer seemed to control him the way it once had. They sat together in the same quiet lounge. This time, the conversation was brief. He spoke first. "I've made my decision," he said. She listened. The investment would move forward. Not only in the hotel, but in a long-term plan focused on staff development, language training, and cultural understanding. He made it clear that the project would continue even when he was gone. Systems would replace moods. Respect would replace fear. She felt relief, but also something deeper. A sense that something fragile had been protected. He thanked her again, but this time his words carried a different meaning. "You didn't save a deal," he said. "You changed how I see people." She did not know how to respond, so she simply said, "I'm glad you listened." He smiled. The changes rolled out slowly over the following months. No sudden titles were given. No dramatic promotions. The waitress continued to work, though her role expanded naturally. She trained new staff. She helped resolve misunderstandings before they grew. Guests noticed the difference. The hotel felt warmer. Staff spoke with confidence instead of fear. Mistakes were corrected with understanding, not blame. The billionaire visited from time to time. Each visit was quieter than the last. He observed more than he spoke. When he did speak, people listened without shrinking. One evening, a new server made a mistake with a guest. The tension in the room rose. The waitress watched from a distance. Before she could step in, the manager handled it calmly. He listened. He apologized properly. He fixed the problem without embarrassment. She smiled to herself. That was the real change. Months later, she was offered an official position. Not because of favoritism, but because people trusted her. She accepted carefully, making sure she would still stay connected to the floor, to the people. She never forgot where she started. The billionaire prepared to leave the country after his final visit. Before he did, he asked to see her one last time. They stood near the entrance of the restaurant where everything had begun. "I was angry that night," he said. "I thought I was being disrespected. And I thought staying silent would be wrong," she replied. He nodded. "Sometimes," he said, "the smallest voice carries the greatest truth." He left without ceremony. No applause, no farewell speech. Life moved on. The waitress continued her work, now with a clearer purpose. She helped others find their voice, just as she had found hers. Guests came and went, unaware of the story behind the calm they enjoyed. And that was fine, because real change rarely needs an audience. It only needs one moment of courage.